Hello, I'm Carrie. I cosplay, crochet, and enjoy history bounding. Not too long ago, somebody in one of the online groups about crocheting asked, what do I do with the little tail from when I'm finished crocheting? There's a knot there, but I don't want to just snip it off. What should I do? And everybody replied, oh, sew in your ends, weave in your ends. And I admit I was about to type pretty much exactly the same thing with the addendum of my mother always told me to weave in 3 times. But then I was thinking, well, I mean, they asked the question for a reason. Maybe they didn't have anybody teach them how to sew in your ends. I was able to find a clip from one of my videos where I do a little bit of that to be able to show them. It's like, hey, this is what people are talking about when they say sew in your ends or weave in your ends to secure them so they won't come undone either with time or washing, wear, because if they come undone, they could completely unravel, and that's a mess to deal with. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to sew in your ends in different places in your work, start, finish, in between. What we need: a darning needle, a pair of scissors, and of course, the item with ends that need to be sewn in. I always like to start with the center. Now, usually I sew my ends in, especially on a blanket like this, as I go along. That way I don't have everything to do all at once. For the center, I've already crocheted over top of my end as I went around. That allows me to pull this snug in the center. Then I go under the stitches. And I'll show you on the back side, you cannot see the needle, so it is completely in between the stitches. If this was for a decorative piece, I would just go around a few times and not worry about actually weaving in the end. But because this is a blanket, and we want it to be able to be washed, we are going to do a proper job of weaving this in. So you can see here, I come out after this one little blue stitch. So I want to miss that stitch, and I'm doing one more to be careful, and go back through it. This way my end won't come back out. And same thing, here is where I just came out. I'm going to skip those stitches and go back through. So it has now gone all the way around once, a little bit more, back, and then again. The end should not come out. It is well anchored. You can snip. And that center is dealt with. We've sewn in the beginning. Now let's sew the very end. This is where, as I was finishing the blanket, I was crocheting, slip stitch to join, pull everything through, and that tied it off. To sew in the ends, I take a look at which way the knot wants to go. So it appears to be wanting to go that direction. Slip it through and then down the post of the double crochet. So that makes the knot lay a little flatter so it's less noticeable on the edge. I can now go underneath the base of the double crochet stitches. Again, needle is not visible from either direction. Pull through. This is where the weaving part happens. I need to skip the stitch or part of the stitch to anchor it so it doesn't just go all the way back and undo what I just did. So that little bump right there is me turning back around the other way. I've come out. I'm now going to go between this purple and blue part of the stitch. And we're secured in place there. My mother always told me, do 3. When you're weaving in the ends, do 3 turns. That will make it nice and secure. And you can barely see, that's where the knot is. Sometimes your end will already be partially covered by a cluster or by some work. I always try to crochet over my work. That way I have less ends to sew in. If I were to put my needle right underneath the stitches now, I'd just be backtracking what I had crocheted over top of. I'm going to put the needle between this brown loop and the blue loop. That will secure it in place. Now going the other way, between this brown and that blue. I'm going to clip the thread now because originally I had crocheted over top of this end, and that was my first securing of this end. So I have actually gone over it 3 times. Okay, here is another end that needs to be tied in. Now we're not already starting at the base, it's just kind of in the middle of the cluster almost. And I have 2 different colors. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the yellow, and I'm going to weave it through the body of the cluster so you can see how this works. Usually when I do this, you can see how a bit of the needle is showing. I look to see, because sometimes I end up with very large chunks of the needle showing, and then it's just not as effective sewing in the ends. So when I make my turn, I need to make sure that I am catching a different part of a stitch. So I'm actually going to go up this way. I'm going a completely different direction, and that works too. I come back. This is a little hard. My darning needle is very long, my tail is a little short. I'm going to catch that and then go through the base of that cluster. Okay, that end is now secure. And oftentimes doing something like that where you can work the tail towards the base of a cluster is very helpful. This knot seems to want to lay in this direction. I'm not going to force the knot to go in a direction that's not natural, even though the tan thread is over here. This is a very variegated blanket. I don't think it's going to make a big distraction by having the tan yarn over being woven in with this blue and yellow. So again, being careful, and sometimes you can carry on past the end of the cluster. And that's that. I think those are the main kind of situations that you may have where you have knots that need to be tied in. The center, the finish, coming out at the underside of a cluster, and then just randomly. It takes a little bit of practice to get really good at doing this, but by sewing in your ends effectively or weaving them in, it means that this blanket, when I'm done dealing with all of my ends, will be able to be thrown in a washing machine and be washed without the ends unraveling. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you found this helpful. Please feel free to share it with anybody who needs an example of how to sew in your ends. I'm sure there are different ways of doing this. This is just how my mother taught me to do this when I was learning to crochet. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for other creative content, and until next time, have fun, be creative, and take care.